On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, we speak with Alan Cornett, host of the Cultural Debris podcast, on G.K. Chesterton and Russell Kirk. All that and more on this episode of Uncommon Sense. Hello, listeners and viewers, and welcome back to Uncommon Sense. My name is Joe Grabowski. I am the Vice President for Evangelization and Mission here at the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. And I am joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Gretelyn Darkey. Hi, Gretelyn.
Hi there. How's it going?
Great, thank you. And we are very grateful today to be joined by Alan Cornett. Alan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you. And for the listeners and viewers, they should know that you are one of the speakers at this summer's Chesterton Conference upcoming, and you will be speaking about Russell Kirk and G.K. Chesterton. And I thought, as a way of getting into it, you could tell us first a little bit about your own background and connection to Russell Kirk, and then maybe fill our listeners in on who Russell Kirk is, just in case they're unfamiliar with him as well.
Well, you may be scaring people off by from the conference by warning them that I'm speaking, but I very, very much appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm really looking forward to it, and I got to go to my first conference last year, and that was a lot of fun. So looking forward to hanging out with the Chestertonians again. That was a lot of laughs and a good time. So
it's a lively bunch.
It is. So encourage people to come out and see us. We will enjoy each other. But I am a Kentuckian. I'm coming to you from Lexington, Kentucky. Although I grew up in the mountains, I'm an actual genuine hillbilly. And my family has been in Kentucky for well over 2 centuries. So we're hard to get out of the state. I've been out of the state for a number of years, for about a decade, and then I came back. The former governor of Kentucky and former baseball commissioner Happy Chandler said that he never met a Kentuckian who wasn't either in Kentucky or thinking about how to get back. So that's that's a lot of truth. But I was in ministry for a number of years, about 20 years or so, and then my family and I moved back to Kentucky after some years in other places. And a couple of years ago, I was accepted into the Catholic Church, and so I've been thankful for that move for me. And also, a couple of years ago, started the Cultural Debris podcast. So that's also been fun. I tell people that the key for the Cultural Debris podcast is that it's people that I want to talk to and probably couldn't get to talk to me otherwise. So they're willing to sit down and let me interview them. So it's have a lot of fun with that, and it's somewhat Chestertonian in its outlook in a broad sense. I think certainly compatible with the goals of the society. I think, but I try to keep a broad and eclectic group of people that I talk to. About 30 plus years ago, it seems it's always difficult for me to express things in that many decades. Over 3 decades is hard for me to think I've been around that long, but I'm afraid I have. I was an assistant for Russell Kirk, and that was a wonderful experience. That was in between my undergraduate and graduate years, and lived in Mecosta, Michigan, where Russell Kirk was from and lived. And of course, the Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal is still there, and they're doing great work. His widow, Annette, is there, and she does tremendous work, still keeping the ideas of Russell Kirk going. So, being an assistant for Russell Kirk was a great thing. It was an opportunity that came along unexpectedly. I was doing some research as an undergraduate on the beginnings of the American conservative movement, and I wanted to interview Russell Kirk and William F. Buckley for my undergraduate thesis. So back then, we used something called the mail, and I wrote them letters, put stamps on it, and put it in the mailbox. And some weeks later, heard back. And both of them, amazingly enough, said, "Sure, come on up, and you can interview me." So, as a 21-year-old, I had a lot more hair back then. I was able to travel and interview William F. Buckley and Russell Kirk, and so when I got to Mecosta, Michigan, which is just kind of in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. It's a beautiful little town, but it's it's the sort of place you have to intend to go to. You're not just going to find yourself driving through. They had this big house. They had this big separate library, with 15,000 volumes in it. They had assistants. They had all these things going on, and I had no idea that any of that existed. And they had kind of a providential view of finding assistants. They didn't really actively recruit assistants. They just thought the right assistants would sort of come to them, that God would just kind of provide. And so when I came up there to interview Russell Kirk, they thought, "Oh, this must be a future assistant." I had no idea that I was actually in a job interview. I thought I was doing the interview, so I probably would have behaved much better had I known. But they asked me to come up there the next year. And so after I finished my undergrad at UK, University of Kentucky here in Lexington, I went up there and worked for them for a year.
Wow, amazing.
It was a lot of fun.
Just to meet two huge minds like that. But I do fear that nowadays many people tuning in might not even be familiar with kind of Russell Kirk's place in the shaping of the conservative mind. A phrase I choose knowingly, right? But maybe you can kind of help guide those who may be total newcomers to Russell Kirk and who he was. Just maybe give us a really quick snapshot of kind of his place in the history of ideas, especially here in America.
Yeah, Kirk is really the writer who gave conservatism its name, which, I mean, for us seems very odd to say, but he did write the book called The Conservative Mind that came out in 1953. And at the time, conservatism, there wasn't really a conservative movement as we understand it. It was a post-World War II phenomenon in a lot of ways. And around that time, The Conservative Mind came out, which was an adaptation of Dr. Kirk's doctoral dissertation from St. Andrews in Scotland, where he had studied. And what that was a distillation of different thinkers, starting with Edmund Burke, and at the time going through the philosopher George Santayana. Later, he would revise it to go through T.S. Eliot. So the subtitle was From Burke to Eliot. So The Conservative Mind from Burke to Eliot. And it was a survey of these and a synthesis of these different thinkers and within them. And they were all in the sort of Anglo-American context. So they were either British or American. And he brought a lot of disparate figures together and was finding within them the sort of common thread of conservatism. One of the people that he mentions in the first edition, of course, is G.K. Chesterton. He doesn't focus a lot on Chesterton in that book, although in later writings, he actually did quite a bit on Chesterton. And of course, he came, was sort of a generation after Chesterton, never heard him or met him or anything. Although he was friends with a lot of figures like T.S. Eliot. He was actually friends with Eliot and, of course, any number of American writers during that time period. But he was then a founding writer for National Review. So William F. Buckley founded National Review magazine, which of course is still published today. But a young William F. Buckley traveled to Michigan to ask Russell Kirk to write for National Review. He's like, "I'm starting this new magazine and I want you to write for it." And so he agreed to do that, and he wrote for National Review, I guess until the 1980s. He wrote regularly and was pretty much in every issue. And over the years wrote 30-some books covering a wide range of topics. He was also an author of fiction and wrote not detective stories, but wrote ghost stories. And his best-selling book was a novel called The Old House of Fear. And it was an award-winning novel when it came out. It's this. He referred to it as a gothic tale, and it's set in a Scottish castle, and it's very spooky. So there are a lot of readers of Russell Kirk's fiction and admirers of his fiction who have no idea about his historical and political writings at all, and yet that's really the biggest selling. Just like a lot of people, read Father Brown stories, but don't know orthodoxy, maybe. In the same way, a lot of people have read Russell Kirk's ghost stories over the years, but not read his political writings.
Yeah, we here at the Society of the creator of Father Brown can commiserate with that kind
Right.
of getting stuck
Yeah.
in the niche.
I was just thinking, oh, it sounds like Chesterton.
Right. Yeah. So there are some connections there that I will certainly be drawing out in my talk this summer.
Ooh, there's a good tease. I think I've encountered Russell Kirk's fiction, but I'm one of those people who didn't really know the political side, so I'm getting my education today.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
great.
and he wrote again, like Chesterton, he wrote in a lot of different genres. So he did a lot of history of ideas, but he also wrote a very big book on T.S. Eliot. It's a survey of T.S. Eliot's writings and thought. He did biography. He wrote a biography of Edmund Burke, and was very good friends with Ray Bradbury, and did some writing about Bradbury's fiction, and was a great admirer of Bradbury. And so just a lot of different areas that he wrote in. He had a very wide-ranging mind, and liked to write about a lot of different things, and wrote a lot over the years. Again, that may sound familiar.
Wonderful. Yeah. Apart from these sort of circumstantial similarities to Chesterton, without totally spoiling your talk, could you point out a few sort of similarities between their thought patterns, maybe?
I think they're both. I don't mean this in a negative way. They're neither one of them are what we would call rationalistic thinkers, right? They're not writing syllogisms, particularly. They're not. They're men of imagination, and very consciously so. And they're bringing in what Dr. Kirk would point to with Saint Newman as the illative sense, right? That this way of thinking that's not simply based on a rationalistic argument, but it's seeing persuasion from art and architecture and literature, and all of these different ideas are pointing us in a particular direction. And so, just like with Chesterton's fiction, his fiction, even though it's a different genre, it's not separate from his nonfiction. It's telling the same story, but in a different way, right? But he very much understands that you're appealing to different people through that, and also different parts of our brain. So if you read The Man Who Was Thursday, it may make you see something that you read in one of Chesterton's poems, or that you read in one of his books, but suddenly, because you read that, it becomes clear where it wasn't before. And so he very much Dr. Kirk very much understood that we are not simply sort of robotic beings, right? We're not simply motivated by rational thought, but these other things also bring us to truth. Truth is not simply apprehended by rational thought. There are all sorts of things that bring us to truth. And I think Chesterton and Kirk both very much saw that. Their writing styles are certainly different, but I think that approach and that understanding of what it is to be human, I think, is the same. And Dr. Kirk had a great appreciation for Chesterton because of that.
Yeah, it strikes me that if Chesterton had lingered and stayed around, that they would have had a mutual interest. And I won't say agreement, because I am one of those who thinks, particularly you take a figure like Edmund Burke and Chesterton's take on him. I think he and Kirk would have found their opportunities to disagree. However, I think just they do strike me both as kind of consummate raconteurs and men of letters, and just interested in the world and interested in everything. And they would have found some commonality there, and maybe even friendship. I mean, if Chesterton could discover friendship with figures like Shaw, certainly with a figure like Kirk.
Absolutely. Well, I think, and others know more about Chesterton in this area than I do, but I have a little familiarity with it. That Chesterton came out of a very different sort of partisan political mindset, right? He was not a Tory, right? He was and had hostility towards like Disraeli, and so where there was a Gladstone man. Dr. Kirk, of course, was a great admirer of Disraeli, and looking back, but one of the key elements of Dr. Kirk's conservatism and his conservative outlook is that conservatism is not a matter of partisan politics. It's a matter of mindset and approach. And Chesterton was somebody who very much fits into that vision that Dr. Kirk had of conservatism, which he referred to as the permanent things. It's a love of the permanent things. And that's very much a Chestertonian idea, I think. And he often quoted Chesterton's line about the democracy of the dead. That was one of Dr. Kirk's favorite lines that he would use over and over about the democracy of the dead, and that's who we need to let speak more often than we do. That there's all this wisdom contained within past ages, but we tend not to listen to them. But they have something to say as well.
Yeah, that's super Chestertonian.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it reminds me too of, Chesterton has, I think it's an essay where he talks about the white fence post and how conservatism isn't just letting the fence post be and just not trying to change it, but you're constantly painting it to get
Correct.
it white again.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
this idea that the permanent things, you're not just trying to not change them, you're trying to keep them fresh and preserve them. And yeah, it's a beautiful sentiment.
Kirk also had a lot of affinity for the distributist ideas of Chesterton. He really first came to them more through his reading in the 30s of the Southern Agrarians and Donald Davidson. And those were figures I think that Belloc had more of a connection with than Chesterton did. Of course, Chesterton, I think, had he lived, probably would have had some more connection with them. But he called himself a Northern agrarian at times, Dr. Kirk did. But that idea of subsidiarity was one that he embraced very strongly, and has that connection intellectually with Chesterton and Belloc both.
Wonderful. I'm just going to take a brief pause here to do a little commercial break for the conference coming up. If you're enjoying what we're talking about, you can come to the conference and hear the full talk about G.K. Chesterton and Russell Kirk. You can even, potentially meet Alan at one of the afterglows and pick his brain even further.
If there's anything left, I don't know.
They'll take the scraps or whatever. No, it's a really unique and wonderful thing about our conference is that you can talk to the speakers. You can interact with some of these great minds that we have coming and sharing their thoughts with us. So if you're interested, you can visit chesterton.org/conference and you can sign up or you can just learn more. We have a lot of great information there, and we would really love to see you at the conference this year. Once again, that's chesterton.org/conference to learn more.
And if not asking Alan about Russell Kirk at the Afterglow, I think it's an appropriate time to ask about bourbon, at least, which I think
maybe
you know a little something about.
It's possible. There may have been some at last year's Afterglows. We'll have to see. There may be more this year. Yeah, I mean, I think Joseph Pierce got all of it, but
that sounds about right.
Well, it actually does connect, though, mention of something like bourbon, because, I think the other thing that Chesterton and Kirk would share in common, certainly, is that if you just say conservatism, right, it can be kind of a question-begging name, because the question is, conserve what, right? And right. That, I think, forms a nice segue into this new endeavor that you do with your podcast, Cultural Debris. I have to admit, I'm a fan, and I hope you won't take this as an insult. It reminds me of NPR in the sense that it has a very gentle and almost, it's like a moment of zen when your episode pops up in my feed, because you start every episode with a nice poem. You tell us about, that there's been a snowfall and the quietude of the snow there, or maybe the first crocuses pushing up through the snow at the beginning of spring. It's a really nice change of pace from the media that I'm used to consuming. And so tell us a little bit more about why the name Cultural Debris and what it is that you're trying to accomplish there.
Well, thank you very much. I try to do a little bit more laughing on the podcast than you could get away with at NPR, but maybe, conservative NPR, maybe that's my new tagline. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Well, Cultural Debris, the title is shamelessly stolen from a Russell Kirk essay, which he wrote, called Cultural Debris. And it started off with, in the essay, he and a friend of his are kind of knocking around the Scottish countryside, which he did in his younger days before he got married. And they were going to estate sales in Scotland. I mean, imagine going to like estate sales in the 1940s in Scotland. That would be, that's just sort of an ideal scenario, isn't it? But his friend was a classicist and collected Latin texts, and he would buy all these old leather-bound Latin texts for a pittance at these estate sales because nobody wanted them. And his friend said, we're recovering cultural debris. He said it's like cultural debris that comes up from a shipwreck and it's floating on the top, and we're kind of going by on a boat collecting it. That image is one that always stuck with me. I read that essay years and years ago, and Dr. Kirk apparently liked the essay too because he included it in the Viking Portable conservative reader. You all are familiar with the little Viking portables that they do. Back in the 80s, Dr. Kirk edited for Viking the conservative portable reader. And one of the things that he included in there that he actually wrote was this essay, Cultural Debris. And so I stole the title from him. But it's also a nice broad umbrella because it allows me to talk about anything I want to talk about. So it's sort of the guiding principle is really just things that I think are interesting. But I'm coming from my own worldview, which is a Kirkian, Chestertonian type worldview. So in the most recent episode at the time of this recording was an episode on Dorothy Sayers' collection of plays on Jesus, the man born to be king. So that's the kind of thing that we talk about. But I've talked about everything from, of course, Russell Kirk comes up sometimes. We've talked about, I've had Holly Ordway on to talk about Tolkien. I've had Father Michael Ward on to talk about C.S. Lewis. And I've talked about Armagnac with Raj Bhakta, who owns a company that sells 150-year-old French Armagnac. And so, just things that are sort of on the sidelines maybe, but have been around a long time. And so we're trying to bring those things to light and talk about them and to the sort of people who find them interesting. One of the things you have to recognize with the podcast, I think, is that you can't be all things to all people. So I've got my niche, and so I'm happy to live there. But people who like the podcast, I've discovered, really like it. I know that there are a lot of people who wouldn't find it interesting at all, and I'm okay with that. That's fine.
That sounds really, really cool. For some reason, a friend of mine restores like fancy old Baroque picture frames just for fun. Yeah. It sounds like you're restoring a picture frame.
I would love that sort of. Yeah, that's the sort of thing I love.
I love that. Yeah.
That kind of those acts of recovery, right? That you're taking. You're taking that which was broken and making it new and useful again. I think that's the kind of conservatism that we need, that we're trying to find those things that maybe need mending, and maybe they need a new coat of white paint and to dress them up again and put them back into use. So
no, that's great. Yeah. And every time I hear another school that's saying Shakespeare is, why do we teach that? It's not important. And my heart breaks a little.
Right. Yeah.
Very frustrating. I'm happy for people like you. Yeah. But
well,
thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's just about going to wrap it up for us. I really appreciate, again, the podcast. I recommend it to all of our listeners, and we'll, of course, have a link in the show notes for people to go there. We invite, once again, everyone to come and check out the summer conference where they can meet Alan, hear a little bit more about Chesterton and Kirk, and another figure you may have heard of, St. Francis of Assisi, who I think also shares a little bit in common with the two of them. And I would also encourage people to check out the Cultural Debris excursions, Alan. And why don't, maybe as the last word, you take a quick moment to tell us about that, because that's a unique, really embodying of the source of that Kirk essay, right? Traipsing about.
Right. Yeah. Trying to shake loose bits of culture. Yeah. This past fall, my friend Tom Ruby and I went to Genoa in Italy, and we were there 2 weeks, but it was with two different groups. We even had on one of those trips Dale Ahlquist, who some of the folks here may know about. And Dale has a devotion to St. Catherine of Genoa, and we got to go to her church, and they have her body in a glass sarcophagus there, and so they were able to visit St. Catherine, and we were able to pray there with St. Catherine, and that was moving. It's not often one gets to see a saint, especially one from the same time as Columbus. Columbus was from Genoa, and she and Columbus may have even known each other. There's some evidence that they may have known each other as children. But the idea is to go with small groups. We had 6 six plus Tom and me each week, and this is a trip where you get a reading assignment. So we give people a little bit short reading assignments to kind of help with discussion, but they're tied into what we're seeing and talking about from a sort of a macro level. We're talking about culture and history and that, just the very ideas of those things, and trying to make connections with those things to what we see, and try to pay attention to the debris that's out there. There are these little hidden things that you see. We visited a lot of churches. We saw a lot of beautiful art in these churches, Caravaggios and amazing things like that. We ate a lot of really good food. And we had a lot of really good conversation. We laughed a lot, and it was great to get to know each other. The idea of it is essentially the antithesis of kind of industrialized travel. So we stayed in a bed and breakfast right in the old city. So we were essentially in the same kind of buildings that everybody who lives in Genoa were in. So, you're coming and going, you're living like they are. And it's not, you don't retire to your hotel with wait staff and, you're separated from everything, but we're trying to kind of embed into the culture itself. And, of course we're visitors, but we want to be visitors and not tourists. We want to try to connect. And it's nice to walk around, and I'm still doing my Duolingo Italian, so I'm working on it, but it's nice to go around Genoa and all you hear is Italian,
Yeah.
Tom and I went to Rome afterwards, and we kept running into all these people speaking English. It was very disappointing. But when you're in Genoa, you could communicate with people. They would realize you spoke English, and they would be nice and speak English with you to the degree they could. But you're really just, you get a completely different feel when you don't speak the language, but that's it. It brings the culture to life. And so we had a great time, and we're doing it again this year. And we are planning trips to Austria as well, and then going back to Italy this fall. And so if people want to find out about those trips, let us know.
Exciting.
Once again, yeah, we will have those links in the show notes, and all the links to the various things that we've spoken about here today. And once again, Alan, on behalf of both of us and of all our listeners and viewers, I'm sure, I just want to thank you again for taking the time and speaking with us today.
Thank you all for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And Gretelin, thanks again to you for co-hosting. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Same, Joe.
And once again, for Uncommon Sense, my name is Joe Grabowski. We will talk with everyone again soon. Hope that you tune in. Please give us a like, subscribe, share this with your friends, write us a kind review, all those things that help podcasts get around to new audiences. We're trying to recover some of our own cultural debris by spreading Chesterton to the masses, and we can certainly use your help with that. And of course, as always, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless.